Let's kick things off by introducing our protagonist, Jack. Now, Jack wasn't your typical Hollywood hunk. He wasn't sculpted from granite, didn't sport a six-pack that could grate cheese, and his fashion sense peaked somewhere between practical and whatever's clean. But what Jack lacked in GQ appeal, he more than made up for in good old-fashioned salt-of-the-earth honesty. He was a farmer, born and bred, and his life revolved around one thing: his land. This wasn't some fancy organic farm with yoga retreats and artisanal kale chips. This was a good old American farm, the kind where the rooster's your alarm clock, the smell of manure is practically aromatherapy, and the nearest Starbucks is a 2-hour drive. Jack loved every muddy inch of it. He nurtured his crops like they were his own children, whispering sweet nothings to the corn stalks and serenading the soybeans with country tunes. He was a simple man, content with his simple life until... Enter Hoa. Hoa, where do we even begin? Picture this. A real housewife reject, dipped in a vat of entitlement, and sprinkled with a generous helping of, "I'm better than you." She was the kind of woman who thought farm-to-table meant ordering takeout from Whole Foods. Her natural habitat wasn't the rolling hills of the countryside, but the manicured lawns of gated communities and the velvet ropes of exclusive nightclubs. Yet, here she was, gracing our humble town with her presence. Why? Boredom, mostly. Her daddy bought her a country retreat. Read. A McMansion with a stable for her pampered ponies. Because, apparently, retail therapy and Botox injections just weren't cutting it anymore. Hoa treated our quaint little town like her personal playground, a place where she could flaunt her wealth and indulge her every whim. And her favorite pastime? Terrorizing the locals with her prized possession. A monstrous, gas-guzzling Jeep Wrangler, painted a shade of pink that could induce seizures. This wasn't your average, run-of-the-mill Jeep. Oh no, this was a custom Jeep, tricked out with nostalgia many unnecessary accessories that it looked like a transformer having an identity crisis. Lifted suspension? Check. Oversized tires that could crush a Prius? Double check. A sound system that could make your internal organs vibrate? You betcha. And Hoa loved nothing more than to barrel down our dirt roads, blasting obnoxious pop music, and leaving a trail of dust and destruction in her wake. The townsfolk tolerated it, mostly. They were a polite bunch, raised to respect their elders, even the ones who acted like spoiled toddlers. They figured Hoa would eventually get bored and flit off to the next shiny object that caught her attention. But then, she set her sights on Jack's farm. Started small. A stray tire track across the edge of his property. A flattened row of sunflowers. A passive-aggressive honk as she sped past, showering his prize-winning pumpkins with gravel. Jack, ever the optimist, tried to brush it off. "Kids will be kids," he'd mutter, even though Hoa was pushing 40. He tried talking to her, politely explaining that her joyrides were damaging his crops. He even offered her a slice of his famous apple pie, made with apples he personally harvested. Mind you, but Hoa just scoffed. She told him his farm was an eyesore, that he should sell out to developers and build a golf course. She called him a hick and a loser. And then, with a flick of her perfectly manicured wrist, she peeled out, leaving Jack choking in a cloud of pink dust. But the real tipping point, the moment that transformed Jack from a mild-mannered farmer into a vengeful vigilante, happened one fateful afternoon. Jack had been working tirelessly on his corn crop. It was his pride and joy, a field of golden stalks that promised a bumper harvest. He envisioned blue ribbons at the county fair, bragging rights among his fellow farmers, and maybe even enough profit to finally fix that leaky roof. He was out there, sweating under the scorching sun, when he heard the familiar roar of Hoa's Jeep. He looked up, and his blood ran cold. She was heading straight for his cornfield, her eyes glinting with malicious glee. Jack frantically waved his arms, yelling for her to stop. But Hoa just laughed, a high-pitched, screeching sound that could curdle milk. She floored the gas pedal and plowed right through his cornfield, tearing through the stalks like a combine harvester on steroids. Jack watched in horror as months of hard work were reduced to a mangled mess of green and gold. He stood there, speechless, as Hoa circled back, her Jeep now adorned with a festive garland of shredded corn stalks. She stopped beside him, rolled down her window, and gave him a saccharine smile. "Oops," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Did I do that?" And that, my friends, was the straw that broke the camel's back, the seed that sprouted into a full-blown field of fury. That was the moment Jack decided that enough was enough. Hoa had messed with the wrong farmer. She had crossed the line. And now she was going to pay. Oh yes, she was going to pay dearly. Now, Jack wasn't a fool. He knew taking on Hoa alone would be like wrestling a greased pig. Messy, exhausting, and likely to end with him covered in something unpleasant. He needed a team, a posse, a ragtag band of rural avengers ready to fight for justice, and maybe a few cold beers along the way. First up was Earl. Earl was the town mechanic, a greasy-fingered genius who could fix anything with a wrench, duct tape, and a healthy dose of cuss words. He was also a master of disguise, thanks to his extensive collection of camouflage gear and a talent for imitating bird calls that bordered on the uncanny. Earl had a bone to pick with Hoa because she once complained about the noise pollution coming from his garage, which was, admittedly, a symphony of grinding metal and power tools. Plus, he owed Jack a favor for bailing him out of jail after that unfortunate incident with the fireworks display at the annual cow chip throwing contest. Don't ask. Next, we had Martha. Martha was the town librarian, a sweet old lady who looked like she wouldn't hurt a fly. But beneath her gentle exterior lurked a mind sharper than a tack and a knowledge of local history that would make Wikipedia weep. Martha had a grudge against Hoa because she returned a book on etiquette with a coffee stain the size of Texas. And more importantly, Martha knew everything about everyone in town, including all the juicy dirt on Hoa's shady family history. Finally, there was Billy Bob. Billy Bob was Billy Bob. He was a lovable oaf with a heart of gold and a vocabulary that consisted mostly of grunts and monosyllabic words. But what Billy Bob lacked in intellect, he made up for in brute strength and an unwavering loyalty to his friends. Billy Bob's beef with Hoa stemmed from the time she ran over his prize-winning petunia patch with her Jeep while trying to parallel park, a skill she clearly hadn't mastered. With his team assembled, Jack gathered them in his barn for a top-secret strategy session. The air was thick with the smell of hay, cow manure, and simmering resentment. "All right, folks," Jack said, clapping his hands together. "We all know why we're here. That city slicker, Hoa, done messed with the wrong farm. Now, we're gonna teach her a lesson she won't soon forget." Earl leaned back in his chair, cracking his knuckles. "So, what's the plan, boss? We gonna sneak into her house and replace her Botox with Elmer's glue?" Martha adjusted her glasses. "I think we should take a more subtle approach. Perhaps we could anonymously leak some damaging information about her to the local newspaper." Billy Bob scratched his head. "Can we just smash her Jeep with a hammer?" Jack chuckled. "I appreciate the enthusiasm, folks, but we need a plan that's both effective and entertaining. We need to hit her where it hurts, but we also need to make sure she knows it was us who did it." And so began the brainstorming session. Ideas were tossed around like horseshoes at a county fair. Some were brilliant, some were ridiculous, and some were downright illegal. The Operation Crop Circle. They would sneak onto Hoa's property and create elaborate crop circles in her manicured lawn, spelling out insults in giant, swirling patterns. The political statement. They would collect a mountain of cow manure and dump it on her doorstep, arranged in the shape of a giant middle finger. The hay bale hijack. They would sneak into her stable and replace her pampered ponies with hay bales, dressed in horse costumes. But none of these ideas felt quite right. They lacked the je ne sais quoi, the perfect blend of humiliation and revenge that Jack was looking for. Then Martha spoke up. "I heard that Hoa is planning a lavish party at her clubhouse next weekend," she said, her eyes gleaming mischievously. "It's supposed to be a black tie affair, with all her wealthy friends from the city." A clubhouse? Jack's ears perked up. He knew exactly what to do. "That's it," he exclaimed. "We're gonna vandalize her clubhouse." The team erupted in cheers. This was the perfect plan. It was bold, it was audacious, and it would send a clear message to Hoa that she couldn't mess with the country folk and get away with it. The next few days were a flurry of activity. Earl scoured the junkyard for a beat-up bulldozer that he could get running again. Martha researched the layout of HOA's property and identified the best entry points. Billy Bob practiced his bulldozer driving skills on a stack of old tires. And Jack was busy perfecting his masterpiece. A series of hilarious, yet subtly insulting, graffiti designs that he planned to spray paint on the clubhouse walls. As the day of the party drew closer, the excitement and anxiety in the barn reached fever pitch. They knew they were taking a big risk. If they got caught, they could face serious consequences. But the thought of seeing HOA's face when she discovered what they had done was enough to keep them going. They were ready. The bulldozer was fueled, the spray paint was loaded, and the team was armed with a healthy dose of righteous indignation. It was time to unleash their inner vandals and give HOA a party she would never forget. The stage was set, the plan was hatched, and the only thing left to do was wait for nightfall. Get ready, folks, because next we are tearing down that clubhouse. The night was as black as a cow's backside on a moonless night. A gentle breeze rustled through the cornfields, carrying the scent of freshly tilled earth and something else. Was that anticipation? Or was it just Billy Bob's questionable body odor? Either way, the air was thick with excitement as Jack and his crew gathered at the edge of HOA's property. Earl, dressed in his full camouflage getup, resembled a walking, talking bush. He was in charge of scouting the area and making sure the coast was clear. Martha, surprisingly agile for a librarian, was armed with a pair of binoculars and a detailed map of the property. Billy Bob, his eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and confusion, was strapped into the driver's seat of the bulldozer, looking like a toddler who had just been given the keys to a monster truck. And Jack, his face grim with determination, carried a backpack full of spray paint and a heart full of righteous fury. "All right, team," Jack whispered, his voice barely audible above the chirping crickets. "Remember the plan. Earl, you're on lookout. Martha, guide Billy Bob to the clubhouse. Billy Bob, try not to run over anything or anyone. And me, I'll take care of the artistic enhancements." With a nod of their heads, the crew dispersed into the darkness. Earl melted into the foliage, becoming one with the night. Martha, with her map in hand, led Billy Bob and the bulldozer on a winding path through the fields, avoiding the security cameras and the watchful eyes of HOA's security guards, who were, no doubt, too busy watching reality TV to notice anything amiss. As Billy Bob lumbered towards the clubhouse, the sound of the bulldozer engine grew louder, shattering the peaceful silence of the night. The clubhouse, a gaudy monstrosity of glass and steel that looked like a spaceship had crash-landed in the middle of the countryside, loomed large in the distance. Billy Bob, despite his initial enthusiasm, was starting to get nervous. He had never driven a bulldozer before, and the thought of demolishing a building filled him with a mixture of excitement and terror. "Martha," he stammered, his voice trembling, "are you sure this is a good idea? What if we get caught?" Martha patted him on the shoulder. "Don't worry, Billy Bob. I have a feeling this is going to be a night to remember." As they neared the clubhouse, Jack emerged from the shadows, his backpack slung over his shoulder. He gave Billy Bob a thumbs up and motioned for him to stop the bulldozer. "All right, Billy Bob," Jack said, his voice filled with anticipation. "This is it. Are you ready to make history?" Billy Bob took a deep breath and nodded. "Let's do it." With a roar of the engine, Billy Bob revved up the bulldozer and charged towards the clubhouse. The impact was deafening. Glass shattered, steel groaned, and the entire building shuddered. The sound was so loud, it probably woke up every cow in a 5-mile radius. Jack watched in glee as Billy Bob plowed through the walls of the clubhouse, tearing down the carefully crafted facade of wealth and sophistication. He couldn't help but laugh as the remnants of HOA's lavish decorations, chandeliers, velvet drapes, and expensive artwork were reduced to a pile of rubble. As Billy Bob continued his demolition rampage, Jack got to work on his artistic enhancements. He pulled out his spray paint and began to decorate the remaining walls of the clubhouse with a series of hilarious, yet subtly insulting, graffiti designs. He painted a giant portrait of HOA as a spoiled brat, complete with a tiara, a diamond necklace, and a pair of Gucci boots. He wrote a series of satirical slogans, such as, "Keep calm and let the farmers farm," "Save the corn," "Save the world," and "Hoa, go home." And, as a final touch, he drew a picture of a giant middle finger, pointing directly at the spot where Hoa's prized Jeep was parked. But the piece de resistance, the coup de grace of their revenge plan, was yet to come. Remember those pigs Jack had been fattening up for the county fair? Well, he had a special surprise in store for Hoa and her guests. With a sly grin, Jack signaled to Earl, who emerged from the bushes with a remote control in his hand. Earl pressed the button, and a gate on the far side of the property swung open, releasing a horde of ravenous pigs. The pigs, eager for a midnight snack, stampeded towards the clubhouse, their snouts twitching and their tails wagging. They descended upon Hoa's meticulously manicured lawn like a swarm of locusts, devouring every flower, every shrub, and every blade of grass in their path. But the real fun began when the pigs discovered the remains of the buffet table. They feasted on the caviar, the lobster, and the foie gras, their snouts covered in expensive delicacies. They even managed to knock over the champagne fountain, creating a frothy pink river that flowed across the lawn. The scene was utter chaos. The clubhouse was in ruins, the lawn was destroyed, and the pigs were having the time of their lives. It was a perfect storm of destruction, a symphony of mayhem, and a testament to the power of rural revenge. As the sun began to rise, casting a golden glow over the carnage, Jack and his crew gathered at the edge of the property, their faces beaming with satisfaction. "Well, folks," Jack said, his voice filled with pride, "I think we can safely say that Hoa's party is officially over." They piled into Earl's beat-up pickup truck and drove off into the sunrise, leaving behind a scene that would be talked about in town for years to come. But their adventure wasn't over yet, because as they soon discovered, Hoa wasn't about to take this lying down. Oh no, she was about to unleash the full force of her wealth and power upon them. And the battle for the soul of their small town was just beginning. The town was abuzz with excitement. The trial of Jack versus Hoa was the hottest ticket in town, surpassing even the annual cow chip throwing contest in popularity. Everyone had an opinion, and the local diner was practically vibrating with gossip and speculation. Would Jack and his crew get away with their audacious act of vandalism? Would Hoa manage to wrangle a guilty verdict and exact her revenge? Or would the whole thing devolve into a mudslinging contest worthy of a reality TV show? The courtroom was packed to the rafters. On one side sat Jack, Earl, Martha, and Billy Bob, looking slightly out of place in their overalls and flannel shirts. On the other side sat Hoa, radiating icy disdain in a designer suit that probably cost more than Jack's entire farm. Flanking her were a trio of slick, impeccably dressed lawyers who looked like they'd just stepped out of a Hollywood legal drama. The trial began with a bang. Hoa's lawyers, armed with glossy photos of the demolished clubhouse and tearful testimonies from her wealthy friends, painted Jack and his crew as a bunch of lawless hooligans who had terrorized an innocent woman and destroyed her property. They argued that Jack's actions were motivated by jealousy, resentment, and a deep-seated hatred of anyone who was wealthier or more successful than him. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," the lead lawyer intoned, his voice dripping with condescension, "these defendants are not farmers. They are criminals. They are a threat to our community, and they must be brought to justice." Then it was Jack's turn. He stood before the jury, his hands calloused and his face weathered by years of hard work. He spoke in a simple, honest voice, telling the story of how Hoa had repeatedly harassed him and his neighbors, how she had destroyed his crops, and how she had treated the townspeople with disrespect and contempt. "I'm not gonna lie," Jack said. "I vandalized her clubhouse, but I did it because she left me no choice. She pushed me too far. She disrespected my land, my livelihood, and my community, and I wasn't gonna stand for it anymore." He went on to present evidence of Hoa's reckless driving, her numerous violations of local ordinances, and her history of mistreating her employees. He even called Martha to the stand, who testified about Hoa's family's shady business dealings and their long history of exploiting the local community. But the real turning point of the trial came when Earl took the stand. Dressed in his full camouflage getup, he recounted the events of the night of the vandalism with a level of detail that was both hilarious and damning. He described how he had used his bird-calling skills to distract the security guards, how Martha had navigated them through the darkness, and how Billy Bob had managed to demolish the clubhouse without accidentally running over anyone or anything too important. He also revealed that he had secretly recorded Hoa bragging about her plans to turn the town into a luxury resort and drive all the Hicks out of their homes. The recording, which was played for the jury, sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Finally, it was Billy Bob's turn. He shuffled to the stand, looking as nervous as a chihuahua at a dog show. When asked to describe his role in the vandalism, he simply shrugged and said, "I drove the bulldozer." The courtroom erupted in laughter. Even Hoa couldn't help but crack a smile. After days of testimony, the jury finally retired to deliberate. The tension in the courtroom was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. Hours passed, and still there was no verdict. Finally, just as everyone was starting to lose hope, the jury foreman emerged from the deliberation room, his face grim. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "we have reached a verdict." The courtroom fell silent. "In the matter of Jack versus Hoa," the foreman continued, "we find the defendant not guilty." The courtroom exploded in cheers. Jack and his crew embraced, tears of joy streaming down their faces. The townspeople erupted in applause, celebrating their victory over the forces of wealth and privilege. Hoa, on the other hand, looked like she had just swallowed a lemon. Her lawyers looked equally crestfallen. Their carefully constructed case had crumbled before their eyes. But the humiliation didn't end there. The judge, after hearing all the evidence, ordered Hoa to pay restitution to all the farmers whose crops she had damaged, to donate a substantial sum to the local library in honor of Martha, and to attend a mandatory course on rural etiquette. And as a final indignity, the judge ordered her to spend 1 week working on Jack's farm, mucking out the stables and planting corn. The town celebrated for days. Jack became a local hero, a symbol of the triumph of the underdog. He continued to farm his land, living a simple but fulfilling life. Earl went back to fixing cars, Martha went back to her books, and Billy Bob went back to, well, being Billy Bob. As for Hoa, she eventually sold her country retreat and moved back to the city, where she hopefully learned a valuable lesson about respecting the land and the people who live on it. And so our story comes to an end. But the moral of the story remains. Don't mess with farmers, especially when they have a bulldozer and a sense of humor. Alright folks, that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed this wild ride of revenge, humor, and rural justice. If you did, be sure to give this video a big thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to my channel for more hilarious stories from the Heartland. And don't forget to leave a comment below and let me know what you thought of the ending. Did Jack get the revenge he deserved? Or should he have taken things even further? I can't wait to hear from you. And remember, stay sassy, stay classy, and always stand up for what you believe in. Until next time, y'all.